Okay. So where are you gonna take us, Mary?
It's a good introduction.
You want me to introduce what we're doing? Okay. As you will recall, last week at this time, we were here and Linda gave a overview of where we've been with the process in getting here to these revisions, that this is the last of our master plan implementation revisions. We did commercial industrial, residential, and now this is ag and conservation. So we're very happy to be getting to this point. The Planning Commission sent this on after their August 3rd work session. We went over very quickly last time what the overall changes were, and we received some comments, but we haven't made any, from you all, I mean, we haven't made any changes yet. We are going to do, if it's okay with you, what we've done previously and go page by page by page through this. It's not intended to be a presentation, so interrupt at any time and ask questions and make revisions, and we'll just go from there and then bring it back to you at the end with all the revisions. Because of the way the code is, certain things, if you have a question, we would probably want to delay it till we get to another section where there's more detail about that. We are going to start with the first few pages, which are definitions, but some of your questions about that may be answered when we get to the regulation part later in it. So, but it's meant to be, as it always has, a conversation. So I'll just start at the top of page 1. Again, this has been on our website, the revised copies as well as a summary of it. This first definition is a new definition. It was new to the state this year. It's agritourism. Obviously, the uses themselves aren't new, but it was consolidated into a single definition by the state. And this definition you see before you in this code reflects the state definition with one exception. And that exception is camping and incidental stays. The part where you see that's the sixth line down, camping and incidental stays provided that they are limited to no more than one campsite. That is unique to this code, that is not in the state code, and that is because agritourism is intended to be a permitted use in our code, and commercial camping, which would be more than one of those type of stays, is a conditional use. So we pulled that out in the definition so that we could differentiate it later in the use table.
But you're allowing it to be a conditional use.
We are allowing it to be a conditional use. And that was in response, we did receive a comment on that, and the Planning Commission worked through that comment, and this was the agreement that they came to. And I think from the person who made the comment, he is happy with that change. That's the response that you received, right, Price?
So community input works.
It does.
Okay, I have a question already.
Sure.
Principal agricultural production, what do you mean by principal? I know what it means, but I'm just saying that could be looked at different
On the
ways.
fourth line.
I think that's intended, again, it's from the state wording of that. I think it means that that's the principal use of the property.
Yeah, but it's principal 51% of the use? Or is it 80%?
Oh,
Or that's what I'm getting at.
principle itself.
Say it
Well,
again?
principal use
Defining
is
principal
defined as the main use of the property, but
So
let
it would be
me,
51% of the property would be
it's
used.
not always 51%, and I hate to do this to Anastasia, since you just sat down. But that would be an interpretation of the zoning administrator. But let me
Okay.
first tell you what a principal use is. It's the primary activities or structures for which a site is used, and there can be more than one principal use on a property, which doesn't make mathematical sense.
No.
But it's the way it's interpreted, so.
All right.
That doesn't,
I'm just looking at it as someone, I could do this, and I have 51, that's how I'm looking at it. I just
understand.
wanted to be here so people aren't going to question it and try to do something that we don't intend.
well, agriculture is allowed in all of our districts as a
Right.
permitted use, so are you suggesting like, if somebody had a property and they just farmed some little portion of it and then said, and because that's my principal use, now I'm gonna do agritourism?
Yes.
That's far reach, I would think.
Well, it's creating a loophole, almost a loophole.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
that's-
creating a tool for them to use to do a whole lot of other things. By just saying it's a principal use.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna talk to Jim Ullman about that.
Okay, I
Yeah,
just
no,
brought it
no,
up.
no,
Yeah.
As long as it's,
I don't expect an answer right now, but,
Okay.
you know, I just want to bring it up there because people want to tour my property all the time. And I had tomatoes planted in the backyard, therefore I could charge for that. The
Let me
Fraser
talk-
Gym is a very, very popular place. Go ahead.
We've heard that. Okay, let me check into that. I think that's probably a legal question, but, so I don't want to step into it. But I will come back at the next meeting
Okay.
with an answer to that. Okay, the next definition is an existing definition, but it is being amended here. And this amendment to attached accessory dwelling is not, believe it or not, a substantive change. It's basically a change based on the way the zoning administrator interprets this use right now, or would like to be able to interpret it with something clear. So this isn't changing any regulations. This is just an attached accessory dwelling. It currently says a portion of a single-family dwelling that shall provide complete independent living facilities for sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation within the main dwelling unit. And what's being added, it may be internal, and that would be, as it sounds, inside the home itself, or it may be separated from the main dwelling by a continuous common wall, which would not be considered internal if it doesn't have a door. So that's kind of the loophole that was there before, or not loophole, but the confusion that was there before. And then some people would like to say that something that's farther away and they connect with a breezewood is attached. And this was at Jay's suggestion, that it may not be separated by more than 15 feet of livable floor area. So that means if you go beyond the 15 feet of livable floor area and it's just a breezewood, then you are becoming a detached accessory dwelling, and then there are other requirements that apply. So again, this looks like kind of a substantive change, but it's really just a way to ease the interpretation of this use. And we will get into the whole accessory dwelling, which was a more controversial topic, but that'll be later on. Banquet and event facility, this is the replacement for Country Inn that we talked about a little bit last week, and has been probably one of the 4 or 5 most controversial or most, one of the reasons we really wanted to do this is to clear up this use that comes to the BZA. It is a conditional use in the ag and currently in the conservation zone. Again, we'll be making a recommendation that it not be allowed in the conservation zone, but still in the ag by conditional use. And the difference here is when it was a Country Inn, it also had to have at least a single room for rent, which really wasn't what it was intended to be. So a lot of what was coming through, it was confusing to citizens that a Country Inn was coming in when really it was an event facility. And oftentimes people would almost have to make a room for rent in order to qualify as a Country Inn. So this is telling it like it is. This if you come in now for this, everybody knows what you're coming in for. A bed and breakfast, that's just a clarification. Since it says breakfast, we added meals served daily. Seems kind of easy. Building height, this change is to make it consistent and identical to the building code. And those two things should be the same so that there's no permit problems down the road. Go to page 2. Catering establishment used to be with banquet facility. We just talked about it. We pulled out banquet facility, so now this is just a business at which food
I
is.
have to ask a question, sorry.
Sure, no.
What is the average height of the highest roof structure? If it's the highest roof structure and it's 30 feet, the average is 15?
I am going to turn to Anastasia since this was her suggestion. And we actually have a graphic that I didn't bring on this. And
Yeah, so when we look at our code as a existing code, so if we look at the average height, so how we measure as of right now is from the grade level to the highest rooftop
Okay.
of the structure. So building code is measuring from the grade level to the average of the actual roof, not the rooftop. So that was the differences between what we had in our code. But
What does average mean? I don't understand that part.
How they measure, I don't know, but that's what,
I could understand it was different roof heights. But what if it's all the same height, then there's no average?
the answer, I don't know how to.
I had the same question, and it sounded like this was being made consistent with the building code.
Yeah, but
Now, how the building
You'll have to explain it.
I agree. Now, I'm assuming that when you're looking at the roof, what's on it, that you're looking at from the lowest point on the roof to the highest point, the average of those. And that's considered the average.
If it's a sloped roof.
A sloped roof.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's
the
at the
average
bottom.
there is what you're talking about.
Like eaves and
Okay,
then-
so if it's a flat roof, there's no average.
No.
Correct.
And it's just the highest flat roof.
Yes.
Okay.
That would be my interpretation. but
Okay.
We could verify with building.
And I'm gonna bring you a visual, we do have some of these visualed out.
This is to prohibit intrusive structure coming up next to the others, is that correct?
No, it's not really for that, it's to really just make it consistent so that Jay doesn't tell somebody that this amount of feet is what they're allowed for a height, and then it's measured differently when they get to their building
Okay.
permit. So it's really not making any well, it is making a change, but it's really so that those two things are the same.
Standardizing
But
things.
just so that we all understand it, I'll bring something.
As long as we all understand exactly what that means, and not us, but the people that are going to be building this and inspecting it.
Definitely those people do. I'm sure I do. So I'm gonna bring you
All right,
something.
thank
Okay?
you.
Okay. So, if there was no question on catering establishment, that was really just taking out the part of it that was banquet facility. This catering establishment is not permitted in the ag zone, but it's the new definition that is allowed in the commercial zone now that it's been separated out. Commercial camping area, that's what we discussed, just a little bit, and that is attractive land, not less than 5 acres, which is for the purpose of supplying a location for tents, cabins, recreational vehicles, et cetera. The only addition we're making, the only change we're making here is cabins. That was at Jay Voigt's suggestion, to be clear, since that wasn't in there. To my knowledge, there's only one current commercial camping area in the county.
So I thought it's in my district.
Yes. And we'll talk through specific regulations if there were to be any future ones later in the legislation. There's specific existing requirements that we're keeping. So the next two definitions, commercial sawmill, that's a current definition. You can see that we made a slight change to that, taking out that its footprint has to be greater than 2 acres. That is allowed in the industrial districts. We've got a few like this, where things go on in the industrial districts that are industrial, and then something of a less intense nature is gonna go on in the ag district, and there's been confusion at the BZA whether or not it's permitted, if it's accessory. So I think this is one of at least 3 that we've pulled out a new definition simply for ag, which is explaining the less intense use. And we worked with Melvin Bale on this, he was on our concept team, it was extremely helpful. This should solve the problem of the confusion that comes before them. So commercial wood processing would be an ag use, again, not an industrial use, and it processes branches and logs by chopping, cutting, sawing, splitting to produce firewood for sale, and which may include accessory processing of the wood, solely produced by the principal processing to create humus, mulch, or wood chips. So there was agreement that this would solve the problem.
There's no footprint size on that?
I'm sorry?
There's no footprint size?
No. No, that wasn't,
I was just asking because,
no.
does that mean if I had 1/3 of an acre, I could do this?
You.
Good luck.
I
Well, if
believe,
I could
I'll
fit
get
it
to
all
I
in there.
believe it's a
Right.
conditional use, though.
What's that?
There is a lot.
There are, yeah, okay, so there are lot sizes. Remember, these are
Okay,
just definitions.
okay. There's
Right,
lot
there's-
sizes
yeah,
later, okay.
There's that, and then it's a conditional use, so that would
All
be
right.
something that the BZA could look at. There also may be separation requirements on that, but I'll have to look.
All right.
Country Inn, we are getting rid of that definition altogether, replacing it with the banquet event facility. Getting rid of the word custom, that's technical, it's not used anywhere in the code, so we don't need it. We found a few of those,
Yeah, I
strange.
think you did last time, with
Yeah.
one of our last codes too.
Yeah. there's no change to detached accessory dwelling. It's really just put in there informationally for anybody looking at this and wanted to know what an attached is, what a detached is. Again, we are gonna be proposing some somewhat significant changes to the regulations regarding this, but nothing to the definition of it. So on the next page, page 3, under dwelling, under number 2, that's just a clarifying addition to the definition of single-family dwelling, pointing out that it's except when including an attached accessory dwelling. And townhouse is not a new definition, that's just relocated. We felt that it was under, since this is alphabetical, it was under T for townhouse, and if somebody's looking at dwelling and want to find out where all the dwellings are, we thought they should be in one place. So that is simply relocated, there is no change, no substantive change to that. Okay, the next 2 definitions are similar to what we talked about with the wood processing. Food processing and packing of agricultural products is new, and food processing and packing plant. They're both new definitions, but food processing and packing plant is allowed in the industrial district, and it is currently allowed in the ag district. And our staff group did not believe that was an appropriate use in the ag district. It is industrial in nature, but we do see the need for the processing and packing of agricultural products. So we worked with the Planning Commission on this over several meetings, and we agreed that the first definition, which is an operation related to a farm that manufactures, packages, labels, and/or stores any type of food, is acceptable in the ag district. But the food processing and packing plant, which is a commercial operation that manufactures, packages, labels, or stores any type of food and does not provide food directly to a consumer, is what you would see in the industrial district. Again, one is less intense, one is more intense and appropriate for the industrial. Are there any questions about that one? No? Okay. Garden Supply Center, this looks like a new definition, but it was actually in the ag district section separately, and it really belongs under definition, so that is not new language, it's just simply a new
I do
definition.
have a question on that language, though.
Okay.
You have words small or light. They're relative terms. That could mean almost anything. What's small compared to what? And light compared to what? When you're trying to make definitions, if it's a relative term that you put in a definition, it just leaves it wide open.
What do you think would work as an
I guess that's what
alternative?
I'm trying to think
I
of.
don't know. I'm just saying if small, I mean, is
I
it
understand
is
what you're getting at. I
a
thought maybe you had
handful
some-
or, yeah, I know. I don't have an answer.
And
What's the
All right, but you're
question?
making us aware of it.
Excluding lawnmowers, except, like, I guess we could say what it excludes, some of the things that it excludes.
I mean, if you're looking at garden supplies, if you're looking at large, it being like a tractor that Weaver drives, anything smaller than that is okay? 'Cause
Are you
that
saying
would be
like
large.
residential as opposed to commercial supplies,
It's
stuff
just-
like that?
Well, no, because
That doesn't work?
No, because some commercial supplies would be small.
All right. I understand what you're getting at.
I do too.
Say something smaller like garden supplies, gee.
I think we're talking about, you know it when you see it, but I understand that's not a good way to regulate zoning.
It's a bit ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, like you
it's
said,
relative to
lawnmowers, but
what-
lawnmowers are
Yeah.
small compared to tractors.
And it could wind up in legal interpretation and haggled
And I
over.
could, if I opened the garden center up and I started selling stuff, and I said, I'll add this and I'll add this. Somebody says, well, that's not small. Well, it is compared to that.
Say less than 30 horsepower or something.
If you have something like that, there's no argument about it. It says exactly that. Yes.
Let me talk to Jay and see if he has a better, because he would be the one to interpret this. And I mean, he didn't bring up that he had an interpretation problem, but that's,
So I have a question. Does the clarification at the end of the sentence, does that bring it into clarity? In that
and
it's
incidental.
Incident, that's customary and incidental to the sale of garden plants and nursery stock. So you're talking about a business that's selling those types of things kind of as a primary, that's what they're selling, but these you're talking about supplies and equipment that are small in nature, that are incidental to those, your primary sale of plants and nursery stock.
Yeah, the difficulty I'm having is, since this was a relocation, and we do fall into this, when we're just doing that, we don't look as closely as you probably looked. We thought, okay, this belongs in definitions. When we create a new definition, we really go over every word.
Just take small out, light supplies. I know it's open for interpretation yet, but that limits division of this.
I mean, if there's no problem with it, fine. I don't want to,
Let me talk to Jay.
I'm not opening a nursery supply store, but
Right. Let me find out if, from his perspective, there's an interpretation
Yeah.
issue with this, and if there's not, why there's not.
Okay.
You need an answer to that.
Maybe
Okay.
like a non-industrial or something.
Okay.
what is heated? No, I'm just kidding, go ahead.
Actually.
This conversation.
That was debated for a while. We talked about if it should be heated and air conditioned, and people pointed out to us everything isn't air conditioned, so that language did come up. So I'm gonna move on to that. Livable floor area, that goes back to the definition that we talked about earlier of,
Attached dwelling unit.
yeah, attached dwelling unit. So it was at Jay's suggestion that we made it clear that it would have to be heated to be livable floor area, but not necessarily air conditioned, because we do put on the air conditioned floor area.
I grew up without air conditioning. Rough.
Okay, the next two definitions, again, kind of fall into where we were looking for differences between less intense ag uses and more intense industrial uses. So currently, slaughterhouse is permitted in the ag district. According to Jay, we don't have any true slaughterhouses, but if it's listed there, and it was not defined at all, so that was interesting. So we all recommended, or we all agreed that slaughterhouse does not, a full-blown, what you think of as a slaughterhouse does not belong in the ag district, but there are times you would need to do livestock incineration, and we have that later in this draft as an accessory use to a farm. So the second one, slaughterhouse, which is a structure and land where livestock raised off-site are slaughtered for commercial purposes, and that could include the incineration of carcasses, but that's not the primary purpose. That is in the industrial district, and I believe that's permitted, which is appropriate. And then just the incineration, there's further regulations farther on. That is an accessory use in the ag.
Do we have any livestock incineration facilities in the county?
Commissioner Weaver might know more.
Have any what?
Do we have any livestock incineration
No.
facility?
But
Everything's
there are
ours.
certain people who have the ability to do it. They don't commercially do it and invite people in to do it, but
We have access, we have some people that take it out of county, but we don't have any.
Okay.
Unless it's on-site. We do have some on-site incineration for animals, and mostly poultry, or composting sites for large animals on large farms, but you wouldn't even know it.
Okay.
But that's why we had to add it in, because for those people, we wanted to make sure that that was a clearly acceptable accessory use on their ag land. So that's why we added in the livestock incineration. That, again, was a pretty lengthy discussion with the planning commission. Okay, special event, that is only used one place in the code, so we took it out, and you'll see it's under signs. We just added the description in under signs where it made more sense, since there is no further use of it in the code. And townhouse is that, what I had said previously, we relocated under dwellings, so anybody interested could find them anywhere, or, I'm sorry, with the other dwellings that they want. For yard, this is just a technical amendment. You may recall, we did this last time and required further tweaking to specify that only that one rear yard shall be required on a corner front yard. So this is considered technical. Are there any, other than those three follow-up questions, are there any further questions on definitions? Chris, did you want to say something? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Then I'll move on to the next section, which is regarding distance requirements. And you'll recall, we've looked at this each and every time we've done the code because it applies to all types of districts. And basically, this is the distance requirements of certain intrusive uses from residential areas and lots. So the underlying language that you see in the next few pages is pretty much relocation from the existing and ag and conservation districts. So we just, as we did with commercial and residential, we just put everything in this one section. But I will point out to you, there was, you received a letter from Marty Hackett regarding this, and it was regarding contractors' equipment storage. So currently, outdoor contractors' equipment storage requires a 600-foot separation requirement from the residential properties, but indoor only requires 400 feet. In our discussions with staff and with the planning commission, it was agreed that other than the visual impact of a building versus a pile of storage, the impact on the residents is basically the same. You're still gonna get the trucks coming in, you're still gonna get that kind of noise. When we talked it out, we really thought both of them should have the 600-foot separation, and that's why they're now together under the 3 times the distance requirement that you see before you. This did not come out of the work group that we worked with. This was more just a staff recommendation that the planning commission.
It's presently 400 feet.
It's 400 feet for indoor, 600 feet for outdoor, and we've made them both 600 feet. We are recommending they both be 600 feet. Only in that, or they could both be 400, depending on how you look at it, but just that there really isn't a big difference in the impact on the neighboring residential properties, whether or not you have indoor or outdoor. So that was our rationale. Certainly, it's, as with everything, open for discussion. If anybody wants to revisit it later, we could. That is really the only substantive change. This looks like it's been all marked up, partly just the way this works, but really these are relocations from other sections. Okay, again, this next section looks like a brand-new section. It is relocated. It was in a part of the code where nobody could find it, so this puts it where it really belongs, temporary and seasonal uses. We made no changes this time to it. You will recall last fall when we did residential, you added in the part about dumpsters and self-contained portable storage units. We've kept that exactly as it is, simply in a new section of the code. So unless anybody proposes any changes on that section, I'm going to move along. 158.055, rental of certain dwelling units, that is no longer necessary. That's an obsolete part of the code that is being eliminated. So then we moved into the 2 districts, the ag district and the conservation district. And the first thing we did is what we did with all the other districts. We changed the purposes to more accurately reflect, first of all, the purpose that was in the future land use designation in the adopted plans. We did pretty much, they pretty much reflect, as you see on the bottom of page 8, what is in the plan. We use the words generally. We had that discussion with commercial and residential, that we tried to use the words generally so that nobody gets the idea that that's the only thing allowed. So again, that's what we're proposing is short and sweet, the new purpose of the agricultural district. And we obviously are keeping the section for agriculture that said it's the preferred use in the ag district. All agricultural operations shall be permitted at any time, including the operation of farm machinery, and no agricultural use shall be subject to restriction because it interferes with other uses permitted to the district. And then compliance, we did have to change those sections because of Chris's recent legislation. So we did work together to try to catch any of those types of things. And as Chris pointed out last time, we'll get together at the end and make sure it all comes together so we don't have any conflicts.
Just hold on one second, I just want to,
Sure.
give us a second.
Wow.
And this is all just coming out because it's going to.
It's all coming out because, yep,
What's that?
It's, all this is coming out, the next 3 pages, 4 pages, whatever it is, because it goes into the use table.
right. Which, in the end, when you take out all these track changes, I think this 52-page document gets down to like 30 pages. So our code might be nice and short.
Be user-friendly.
That's the idea.
Use tables are so much fun.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Rustine, did you have questions, or did you just want
No.
time to read it?
Yeah, just give me a second here, but, the generally purpose of having those two generally comments is why, did you say?
Because when we talked, I think it was either with residential or commercial, without the word generally, people said, well, then I don't expect to see anything that conflicts with that, anything that's different. And there are exceptions to these. I mean, the purposes aren't the regulations, the purposes are meant to describe what you're gonna see, but they're not regulatory in that you couldn't point to that. You shouldn't be able to point to that and say, for instance, the first one, the purpose of the ag district is to provide locations generally outside the designated growth area. Well, we know there are some agriculturally zoned properties inside the designated growth area. So that's why we're saying generally. We wouldn't want someone to look at the map and say, what's that ag property doing inside the Freedom area, when there are a few, and there's a reason for them, and they're still being farmed, so, that's the reason for that generally. Residential development potential is generally limited to 1 and 2 family. Well, if we're allowing accessory dwellings, that would be an exception to that. If we're allowing, by conditional use, nursing homes and assisted livings, that would be an exception to that. But we don't want to list every possible use in the purposes. That's not the idea of having the purpose of the zone. So, I mean, this is the, kind of the model we've been following for the other districts to describe them. It's very clear for people, though, once they get to the regulations, what the regulations are. They just shouldn't fall on this as telling them exactly what's allowed. I mean, it's more complicated than that, and they have to get to the other sections to do that.
No water and sewer services planned
That is correct.
to these areas.
And that's in line with the plan. I mean, again, this reflects the, both adopted plans.
Okay.
So as Roberta said, just all this deleted language is going in the use table or in the list of accessory uses down the line that you've seen.
Page 19.
That is,
26 is the next page, isn't it?
Page 20, right?
Oh, I guess.
now all that, and including the bulk requirements,
Okay.
so all that's been taken out of these individual sections. So now we're on the conservation district.
Okay.
Same thing, this one actually was already in pretty good shape, reflecting what we wanted it to say and what the plans say. So that initial language was not taken out, but we did add commercial and industrial development should not generally, again, be located in these areas, and residential development should generally be limited to 1 single-family dwelling per 3 acres. And again, no
Now,
water.
you have liquid and fertilizer, dry fertilizer storage and/or sales.
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
11. You're not allowed to store?
That's all going in a use table later on. All of that stuff
That's all
between
being
page 8
deleted.
and 20 is going into a use table later on.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So-
I got it, never mind.
It's
Right,
just
everything with the cross-out is gone.
reformatted.
Right. And some of
Okay,
it
Chuck.
changed, so we could get to whatever change there is when we get to it.
Your comments regarding conservation, again with that, fun word of generally being used. Commercial industrial development should not generally be located, is not consistent with the ag district when you're referencing commercial industrial. Shouldn't it be consistent? Commercial industrial uses are limited, so you're very specific in the ag district when you're talking about commercial industrial, and then you are not specific when you're referencing commercial industrial in the conservation district.
Yeah, and I think in this case, the ag district one is more appropriate, so I would have to look and see which commercial and industrial are being permitted. And
Because for me, the less conditional use, the less ambiguity, the less generalities in defining this, the better we are. But then also, I want to be consistent in how we're looking at the purposes of both ag and conservation.
Well, but they are different zones, and so you'd expect, I know, I'm not trying to be, but you'd expect the likelihood of commercial industrial being in conservation is higher, I would think, than in ag.
I just want,
Is that why, maybe? I don't know.
Maybe. Maybe the best way to do this is, as we go through the use table, we could flag whatever commercial and industrial uses are being allowed in some way, probably conditional in the conservation, and then kind of back it into if we should change this language,
some way probably.
maybe?
I think some of this may have stemmed from when I came, when I first started here, and I was in development review, I had a plan come through, and it was in the conservation district. And my first, you hear the word, at least from being from North Carolina, you hear conservation, you think that's pretty much conservation. Not much can be done in there. And I was surprised at how much can be done in conservation. So I think sort of, we were trying to stem to keep it along the lines of what our comprehensive plan said, but also realizing that there could be some commercial industrial, but typically you will not find that in conservation. Yes, we do have some things that are conservation that do have a industrial commercial-esque nature to them. But I think we're trying to keep it where it's more open space, because you have your steep slope to that area, so it's harder to develop. And for somebody who may not be from Carroll County or around, when they hear the word conservation, they automatically don't think of commercial industrial, they think of more of
I mean, conservation should be used as conservation.
and in the past, it sort of had been, it appeared.
Yeah, where I'm getting to is consistency.
Right.
Consistency in how we're defining things, how we're looking at the purposes, consistency throughout this. And then if there are allowances for conditional use, that we minimize them best we can. And if there are exceptions, regulations are designed to have exceptions built into them. I get that, and that's why we have BZA, that's why we have opportunities to go through a process to have exceptions. But the less exceptions, the better, so people have expectations of what they can and cannot do. That's where we need to end up at the end of the day with this.
I can say, in just glancing at the use table, there is no industrial development, so that's actually not a should. Industrial development should not be located in these areas, but as we go through, you'll see there is some commercial. If you consider a veterinary facility commercial,
Yeah.
it's commercial.
So
That
in
is
that
gonna-
case, then we should say, I apologize, just say will not. There will
For
not be
industrial.
Industrial.
Right.
I mean, and just
I think that's, yeah, I think that would reflect it.
Yeah, the more facts we put in this, the better off, again, we are.
But commercial's a little different.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's fine, it's just, again, it's all about expectations, when somebody's looking into this, on how they are going to, he or she going to develop that piece of property.
I just, you know, if somebody looks at just the use state or the purpose, they say, they automatically see industrial is not allowed. Okay, they don't have to go through the use state.
That's right.
So
Right.
that,
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, just take a look at that.
I'll make that change. Okay, that's really, again, as with the ag district, all this is coming out because it is being relocated and in some cases changed.
Okay.
So don't.
So now we get
Attention
to
to
26.
Yes.
This is fun.
So, we are now at the table of uses, which at this point you're all very familiar with. I'm gonna give my speech anyways on how we did this. We looked at best practices, we looked at other rural codes, we looked at the purposes of the districts, recent trends. Our general goal was fewer conditional uses, but what we found was having that as a general goal, sometimes sometimes it didn't work out. I mean, sometimes it was the appropriate thing to do, so we didn't want to be beholden to that concept. So we still do have we have a few new conditional uses that had been permitted where we didn't want to make them completely prohibited. I'll go through the code and just note any changes that are from all that struck out language.
Well, also, the overall purpose is to keep Carroll County culture in place. You know, not to change Carroll County, land and property. I mean, that's why this is so important, that we are not, what is the best use of agricultural property and conservation property? That we don't have opportunities to change it, like you said, into industrial or something else,
And I think you'll see we really made very few changes to the uses.
I just, going along with Commissioner Rothstein's thing, this is a map came out in what's happening across the country. We're losing about 18.4 million acres of land between 2020 and 2040 due to zoning. At prime agricultural land, and it's due to things like this, zoning changes in it. And one of the things we have to be extremely sensitive to, this is the amount of land in the state of South Carolina will be lost for industrial and residential use in the country here. And this is happening faster and faster every year. We have to be extremely sensitive to food and water in the next 50 years, especially water, but also food. And that's why what we do in zoning directly impacts all this. And Ed's comment leading into this, we have to be extremely sensitive to what we allow on these agricultural lands to keep this open. And I think going to that, I alluded to it last meeting, one change in that is fine, but then we keep having conditional uses. We can change it 3 and 4 times and it's gone. And once agricultural land's gone, it's gone forever. It doesn't get replaced. We're not gonna see it, but one of these days, our grandchildren, somebody's gonna see the impact of it. And you're starting to see that in Ukraine, you're starting to see things that are happening. We have to be extremely sensitive, and it's a balance, but it's a.
Well, this is the great conundrum we have in this county is you try to put the housing development in the designated growth areas.
We
And
have
if
to.
people live in the designated growth areas don't want it there, and it forces the housing development out in the countryside, and then we're gobbling up all our farmland with 3-acre and 1-acre lots.
There's where we have to hold the zoning.
And that's
Either we'll all
why,
gobble up the rural countryside, or the houses will go in the designated growth areas.
Yeah.
and that's also looking at the opportunities to put more residential development in designated growth areas.
Yes.
There are, and we're gonna talk about this, remainders, agricultural remainders that are in designated growth areas that are limited to residential, the amount of residential. And my intent is to promote more residential in those and allow the ag remainders outside the designated growth areas to stay as ag remainders. Because you're right, we need, we defined the designated growth areas to grow. Certain properties, we recognize were not the best place for growth, but then there's other properties, the decision was made, let's relook at that decision, and if it's appropriate to build on it, then build on it. If it's advantageous for an individual, it's advantageous for an individual, but it builds the opportunity to grow in these designated growth areas.
Yes, and I think the open space and the parks are really critical for those people who are in those growth areas, because if they're in that area, it's nice to have that open space and playgrounds and recreation. It's so vitally important that we have that for those communities.
They need it. Yes, you're right, so. Anyway, I'll hit that later when we get to the remainders.
No, but I mean, this is really important, I apologize, but, we talked about it, and Jack talked about it with industrial, is what is the best use of the property as it's defined, commercial, agricultural, conservation, industrial, residential, how are we best using that property? And don't try to make it something it's not. That's key to this, so.
And that's why it's so important you guys are doing all this to clarify it.
Okay.
We don't have anything in this proposal, the planning commission didn't forward anything about the remainders. Maybe it would make sense to, obviously not today, but when we get through this, then to bring up as a discussion topic, because you'll be very familiar with all the new regulations we're proposing to discuss that remainder issue separately and incorporate it in if there's something, if that is what you want to do. Because we don't have there's no language in front of you to review that now. Linda presented last time the research we had done on remainders, but there's nothing new in this proposal regarding that. Not because we don't think you should do it, just because there was no recommendation that came forward on that. So we could do that
There's
separately.
discussion on it.
Yes, there was a
But
discussion.
I think we have to bring that up into this,
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
my proposal is going to be that we, in the growth areas, yes, keep the conditional uses. We eliminate them in the non-growth areas. So it
Regarding
stays that
remainders.
way. And then we have to bring in farmland preservation to come up with some resolution on those other areas, how they can,
Trying to strike a balance.
strike that balance on it, so that we keep those conditional uses in certain areas, we eliminate them in the others,
And what
so.
it's gonna also do is incentivize outside designated growth areas for preservation. If they don't have any further use in remainders, it's going to incentivize them to look at other opportunities like preservation, so.
It's true. Okay, so for now, I'll just go through the use table and we'll bring that issue back up. Okay. So again, you've seen this use table. This will be the third one in the code. The first one's commercial industrial employment campus, then there's the residential one. I will point out, number 12 is new, and it's been added to the others as well. And this was a problem brought to me by Anastasia, that they get calls, or they get people who think the additional regulations mean all additional regulations in the code. And if they don't see it there, that means there's not additional regulations, as you see in that last column under additional regulations. That was never the intent. It was supposed to be helpful and point out other places in 158, the zoning code, where there would be something else to look at, but it was never meant to be completely comprehensive. So that is something we're pointing out. When somebody looks at the use table, it's going to say right there, that's not going to include all additional regulations, particularly site plan review, because that's under a different section of the code. So we added that into all the use tables, and I think that'll be an improvement for people, making it user-friendly. So I will just point out, this is obviously a much better format than looking at all that struck-out language. The new use you see here before you is agritourism, which we talked about the definition. This one is permitted, and let me point out too, this whole table, again, is just principal uses. It's not accessory uses or temporary uses. So this is just principal uses on property, of which there can be more than one. So agritourism is permitted in both ag and conservation. This was a discussion before the Planning Commission, whether or not in conservation it should be conditional. They talked about that at their last meeting, and it was agreed that if somebody is farming in the conservation district, you don't want to make it more difficult for them to do the corresponding agritourism that goes with it. So that was changed from the original staff recommendation, and I don't think we have a problem with that, or we don't have a problem with that, to permitted in conservation. So that's the only change in front of you. Everything else, other than another thing we tried to do is, since every use was listed separately in ag and then differently in conservation, we tried to make we did make all the uses, the description of the uses consistent for anyone looking at it. So they may not be identical to what you saw in the struck-out language, but it's very similar. And these additional regulations that we were just talking about, this refers you to other sections of the code that apply. Anytime you see 158.002 means it's defined. Anytime you see 158.040, that means there's one of those separation requirements from residential properties that we talked about earlier. So that tells somebody right away they got to go back to those sections and find out. And then some of the other sections you would turn to and see additional regulations. So I think that's one of the more helpful things about having the use table. It's hopefully all in one place. So there are no changes to anything until funeral establishment. Currently, funeral establishment is a conditional use in the ag district. We're proposing that become prohibited, that's not an appropriate agricultural zone use.
Can I go back a second?
Sure. Back on this,
Communication towers
yes,
and communication towers complex. What's the difference?
more than one. When you have more than one,
Okay,
it's
so
a
the
complex.
tower on 140, close to where Gerstel is that a complex or is that a tower?
Is there just one?
There's 4 things going up, but it comes to one, if you know what I mean. That's,
It's not the old AT&T tower.
I don't know who originally, I don't know who has it now, it has 4,
Right.
it's not like one single tower going up, if you know what I mean. It's like a,
Well, but are they
scaffolding.
just spires that hold it up, or?
It's
is
like
it-
scaffolding going up, but each one has a, I would call it maybe a tower
Yeah.
going up, and then they got all the microwave stuff on it as well. Is that a complex or is that a single tower?
Saying.
You know what I'm talking about? That's what I'm talking about.
Anna, would that be a single tower, do you think?
I would assume single tower,
Okay.
because it's all together, but again, it will be up.
It is all connected,
It's all ultimately all connected.
but, I mean, as best I can tell. Yes, it is all connected.
You haven't climbed it, huh?
No.
Yeah, I think like a single tower would probably be like the tower we see at the farm museum, that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, but this is not like that.
I think that's the one, I call it the old AT&T, but it has like the NSA used to have the one from below it. It's the one right off Suffolk Road behind Finksburg Pharmacy, Finksburg Veterinary.
I've never noticed.
It's been there for a while, is my understanding, but it's an old, and it may have, at one point in time, been a complex, but now I think it's just, now it just holds cell phone antennas, now that versus what it did before, but if anything, that one may be one of those that is grandfathered in, is gonna be a non-conforming use, legally non-conforming use potentially, if that's, that actually.
Well, we've made no changes to this, so nothing we're doing to tower or tower complex
Right,
is
I'm
gonna,
just
I
wondering what the
understand.
difference is, that's all. Just want to know.
We may not actually have any tower complexes for all we know, it's just, at least in the ag conservation. I don't know of any others around.
Because the complex is not permitted either place,
Right, but I
but the
believe
tower
it's-
is conditional in both places.
Right, and I think the complex is permitted in the industrial. is
I'm
why
talking
that
about
was-
this
in-
one,
Right, for here,
right here.
yeah. I can find that out, I just don't know.
What about transmission towers?
Well, what do you mean by a transmission tower?
Electrical transmission.
Oh,
They're not towers,
Why would they be allowed in that?
because you gotta get your electricity.
I'll get you an answer to
Regarding the
Just something to come back to.
funeral and interment, you're talking commercial?
that. Yes, that is currently allowed in commercial. I will point out to you, there is one currently, that would become non-conforming. It's the one on 26 by South Carroll.
School. Barrier Queen.
That is on ag land.
Barrier Queen.
All of the other ones in the county are either in the towns or on, we rezoned them. When you did your comprehensive rezoning, you rezoned them to commercial. So the ones in the Freedom area are on commercial. So that would be one. Again, it would be it would be non-conforming. It's prohibited.
That's the only change?
No, down to, on that page, you mean, the whole page?
Yeah.
Commercial camping area, we have changed that to, in conservation, it was prohibited, and I believe this was on the recommendation of the Planning Commission to make it conditional, because they believed it was appropriate for commercial camping to also be in the conservation area.
Which one's that for?
Commercial camping, which means more than one campsite, basically.
Okay.
This one right here. So that was prohibited. Golf course, this was a kind of lengthy discussion too. In the conservation, we originally had been thinking it should be prohibited, but it is, the Planning Commission changed it to conditional. There are 2 existing in the county in the conservation district. So those would be conditional uses, and there are some other requirements on golf courses that we could talk about later that I think make it okay to have it conditional. Let's see. And also, and this is probably just an oversight in the conservation district, commercial stable was prohibited, and now we're making it permitted. And it was probably prohibited, it wasn't specifically prohibited, but it wasn't permitted. So once we put the table together, I think that's an appropriate use in the conservation district. So on the next page, what there was a good deal of discussion at the Planning Commission about was in the conservation district, as you see under institutional/community service, daycare, private schools, religious establishments. Currently in the conservation, those are permitted by right. They are not conditional. We as a staff, and I believe, did the work group weigh in on this at all?
I believe they did.
Recommended conditional. The Planning Commission discussed making them prohibited. There would become a number of I believe we identified 8 non-conforming uses you'd be creating of,
For nursing homes or
for making it,
Not nursing
Prohibited.
homes, nursery school, daycare center,
Oh,
nursery
I
school, private
apologize.
school.
well, and actually, they did discuss all 5 of those together. So the 5 you see in a row, assisted living, which is of more than 8 residents, nursing homes, those are currently conditional in the conservation, and we propose those remain the same. But the next 3, daycare, private school, religious establishment, those are currently permitted by right, and we are proposing they be conditional. And the Planning Commission discussed actually making
You
them
know, some
prohibited.
of it, if you look at it, multifamily homes aren't allowed.
That was the
Retirement
argument.
homes are not allowed, retirement village, but yet you go to group living, and they're either, could be conditional use for greater than 8 residents. That doesn't make sense totally.
And when you say conditional use, what prohibits it from existing then? I know you have to go through the BZA and so forth, but, okay, can they even stop it?
They can, as long as
That
it
makes sense.
doesn't,
That
so
needs
the
to be
test is from a Carroll County court case called Schultz versus Pritz, and the language is that you have to basically prove that the impacts would be worse here than elsewhere within the zone. So you have to, it's somewhat presumptive that you're gonna be okay to go
Yeah.
forward with the conditional use, but
But
it's
you
not
put
always.
conditions on it.
And you can put
It gives them
conditions
the
on it,
opportunity.
hours of operation, lighting, a lot more conditions
Well,
than
if
the
it's a
planning
group
commission.
home, there's no hour,
That would,
24/7.
right. In this case, right. But there are in other cases, they
Right,
definitely.
yeah, I see what you're saying,
Yeah.
but,
So,
I mean,
so you have to show that having a group home or whatever one it is, would be worse here than elsewhere, that's similar, in the conservation zone.
I don't think that should be allowed in conservation. Assisted
What
living-
shouldn't, Dennis?
assisted living.
Assisted living facility of greater than 8 residents.
greater than 8 should not be allowed in either
That's what I'm
one.
saying,
What is,
greater than 8.
the property on 3297?
They're 16, they have 16 residents
Yeah,
each.
What's it called?
The one that's right,
They're in
Golden
Hampstead
Crest.
also.
Golden
Yeah,
Crest.
Golden Crest. What's that property?
I bet you it's ag.
It's ag. Like, that's on an ag remainder.
That was one of the examples I believe Linda showed last week.
Right.
Golden Crest, it's on an ag remainder.
So it's ag.
It's ag.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's look at that. Okay.
So it would, as it stands at the moment,
Be allowed.
it's a conditional use
Right.
in the ag zone.
All right, but in conservation zone, I don't think
It-
greater than 8
That should come out.
should be allowed. I think, and conditional.
I agree with you.
I'm sorry, conditional to me just means you go before the BZA. And in my experience, BZA says yes. So it's almost like, yes, you have it if it's got a C by it instead of a permitted. I just think it should be X'd out.
So was it not permitted before?
No, we're talking assisted living and nursing home is currently conditional,
They are currently
Right.
What was it before?
in conservation.
Is currently.
currently. It's
Oh,
conditional.
it wasn't recommended to be conditional?
No.
Oh.
The changes were the daycare, private school, and
Yeah, those
religious.
are currently permitted. So, yeah, we're recommending, and again, it's a discussion that really went back and forth. Certainly those arguments considered.
Because there's, I mean, let's talk cases. I mean, assisted living facility also means drug rehab facility. It means halfway house. It means other things like that, which is fine. They have to go somewhere, but I don't think greater than 8 residents in conservation is where they should be going.
Once you hit over 8, you've hit the magic. That's it.
So is your recommendation to make those two prohibited then in the conservation?
Well, over 8, I would think should be.
Over
Right,
8.
I don't think you
Yeah.
can do the under 8.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying over 8, yes, prohibited.
In both areas, agriculture and conservation.
Okay.
Again, we're looking at what is the best use of that property, so that goes to your argument, but I wonder where else they would be allowed.
There's going to be a lot of non-conforming uses if you include ag,
Yeah.
for what it's worth.
Small homes are usually very successful.
What's that?
The smaller units become very successful to
Sure.
help patients.
Yeah.
Once you get into just adding numbers for
Right.
other reasons, you wind up a lot of times losing focus.
Plus, they're allowed in residential. Over 8 is allowed in residential, correct?
By state,
By condition.
Then it becomes a grazing.
Yeah, well,
cattle.
okay, by conditional use, but in residential,
I know
if
what
so,
you
if we
mean.
took it out of here,
Oh, it's allowed.
it's still allowed in other places. It's not, okay, it's never gonna happen.
Babysitting, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
That's my point on that.
And I believe in commercial as well. It's allowed by conditional use.
I know residential it is.
Okay, just for your information, it's permitted by right in the commercial zones, assisted living and nursing homes. So it's permitted by right in those 3 districts, not allowed at all in industrial,
Right.
and by conditional use in the 4 residential. So, like Commissioner Frazier said, if you took it out of here, it certainly isn't that people wouldn't have a place to put them. I'm just gonna remind you, there's a number of them that would become non-conforming.
In conservation?
Yes, there are a few.
Okay.
I thought I had that with me. That research was done somewhere here.
We'll put them on campsites.
Okay.
so we'll make note that at least part of the board's interested in doing that, and we can talk about it again next time, or-
Yeah.
Okay, if you want to
Okay.
talk about it, yeah.
I mean, or I don't-
And I can bring you whatever the number of ones that you'd be making.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
if that.
Of course, your other option would be to grandfather those in so they don't become non-conforming, even though that's kind of messy, but you can do it.
Are you okay, is the board okay with changing from, in the institutional community service, daycare, private school, religious establishments went from
They're currently permitted.
permitted to conditional?
In conservation.
Right.
Sorry.
Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
How many of them of these things do we have in conservation?
I think there's, of all three of them, I think there's 8.
I think that's what you said a few minutes ago.
Yeah. and I have a- Ah. I can get back to you on the specifics, but I believe it's 8.
And if it's conditional, there's no problem with the owner of this. 'Cause I know, I can't remember what we were talking about before. We were talking about changing the zoning or something, but it would be a non-conforming use. But conditional means if I own it here and I need to go to the bank to get a loan to expand it, there's no problems with stuff like that. The non-conforming use, it would be a problem.
I think technically if you don't have your conditional use, and it says in here you should have a conditional use, I think you are non-conforming. That's what Jay has told us in the past, that if we change it to make it more strict, to make it stricter, you are now non-conforming. I'm not sure what effect that would really have until you tried to expand or something.
Like, that's the argument I've heard, that if
Yes,
it's
we've
not,
heard that
if it's
argument.
non-conforming, therefore,
It's harder for them to get
Hard-
loans. That's,
right.
people have argued that, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know whether it's true or
because I
not.
don't own any of this land,
Right.
so have to ask Weaver questions like this.
And I think the bigger issue with the non-conforming is if you've made them prohibited, because then you have a use that they're no longer allowed to do. And
Right.
it's presumptive if you have a conditional use that it's allowed.
Well, I would like to have information
Okay.
on that before we said it's, conditional instead of
Permitted.
allowed because, or permitted, because it is permitted right now. And
Okay.
those 8 facilities might be in trouble if they're trying to expand or
Well,
upgrade.
I don't know that we could provide you with definitive information about whether or not they'd be able to get loans or other banking, I mean,
Well,
we don't, yeah.
right.
But we can tell you what 8 there are, where they are, and
Yeah.
All right.
what they do.
Maybe
As
they don't
well
need
as you're
loans.
interested in the assisted
Maybe
living.
they won't need loans.
That's right. And it depends on the banking institution, I'm sure, too.
Okay.
Okay, I'll bring you back that information. So the next section that's industrial, this is what we were talking about. There really isn't any industrial allowed, other than winery for some reason is included in industrial because they manufacture, I guess. That's a conditional use in the conservation. You'll see at the top here, the 2 uses we talked about under definitions, which was commercial sawmill, that is prohibited in both districts. However, the new commercial wood processing, which is less invasive or intensive, is a conditional use in ag and prohibited in the conservation.
Commercial wood processing basically is firewood.
And mulch.
Right, okay, yep.
So as you move down there, slaughterhouse is actually, it's currently permitted, I believe, in the ag, but now it's proposed to be conditional in the ag. Pardon me? It is conditional currently? Okay, I'm sorry. That's one that I think as staff, we really didn't think should be allowed. I guess the planning commission kept that as conditional. I'm
It's
fine.
commercial, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't that be more commercial?
Well, it'd be more industrial. It's allowed in the
Industrial? Yeah.
industrial. So that was one of the reasons we just created the livestock incineration as an accessory use. That would be one you might want to consider not allowing in the ag, the slaughterhouse, especially if we don't have any that you'd be making non-conforming.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's bring that back up for discussion, because
Okay. And I'm going to be honest, that might have been a mistake on my part.
Well,
I'm all
now,
for that.
how do you consider warehouse storage and distribution? What is that?
Warehouse storage and distribution. It's defined, we talked about that when we did the commercial and industrial.
Would an Amazon facility be?
Yes,
Oh, that would definitely be not, but what about seed sales or something like that? Seed stored for a
So-
short period of time?
If you look under the first, on page 27, feed or grain sales may include storage is conditional in the ag,
That's feed or grain.
which may include storage. I'm sorry, did you, I thought that was what you said.
I mean, that's feed or grain, but there's other things that are stored for short periods of time in the agriculture industry. Seeds, huge. You're storing a large volume for a short period of time and then gone.
If it's in conjunction with a farm, it would be considered an accessory use.
Okay.
It would not be
All
considered
right.
a primary principal use.
What do you mean by conjunction with the farm? They're using the seeds to plant?
It-
Or they?
If it's part
Or
of,
selling the
I was
seeds.
gonna say,
Right.
or if they're selling the seeds, is
Yeah,
that
storing them
still-
to sell them.
Right.
That's, okay. I
That's
just
part of their
be clear.
overall operation.
Okay.
but what about if they're supplying to other neighbors in that area and they're
Well, they're
storing
selling
them?
them.
Then they're selling them, but it would still be part of their agricultural operation.
Part of the overall operation.
Okay.
Waste treatment.
So we'll revisit slaughterhouse also.
Yeah.
The contractor's equipment storage, is that presently conditional in ag?
Yes, it currently is. We do have, you'll see about 5 pages, 6 pages in, new regulations regarding acre minimums on
Okay.
that came out of the work group that we had, as well as, this is, again, one of those issues before the BZA that cause a lot of problems because currently a lot of variances can be requested for it. It impacts neighbors in a negative way. So we have a few new regulations recommended for that we could get to later unless you want to talk about them right now. The real one, other than the increased separation requirement from residential properties, is that we're recommending a 5-acre minimum to the property. So currently, and as recommended, the use area itself is limited to 1 acre. That is subject to variance, and they do receive a lot of those variance requests. But I think the major thing that we think would help this would be to have a 5-acre minimum for the property itself. And let me check something real quick. Yeah.
Your standard for conditional use, is that just a county standard or is that statewide, nationwide?
That's the Schultz v. Pritz that Roberta referred
Yeah.
to, that was a court case.
So it's like
Statewide.
statewide standard.
Okay, there's no more changes on this page. The last page of the use table, under miscellaneous, banquet event facility, excuse me, was the Country Inn. It remains conditional in the ag, but we are recommending that it go from conditional in the conservation to prohibited. And we've researched this, and there are currently none in operation that would become non-conforming. This one right here.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, the page 30.
I couldn't find it, I have it.
And again, that's one that's been the subject of a lot of discussion and the need to kind of rein it in a little bit. For commercial kennels, we have a few new regulations. They remain conditional use in both the ag and the conservation, which they currently are. And for whatever reason, this is booming. I don't know what's going on with dogs, but they have been getting so many requests for commercial kennels, so this has been an issue in front of the BZA with neighbors. So our recommendation is that if it's more than 10 dogs, and you don't see this in front of you because it's a future recommendation we'll get to, they have to have at least 10 acres. And if it's 10 or fewer dogs, they have to have at least 5 acres. And that's in that section 158.174 that's referenced under additional regulations. And the thought there is the main complaint regarding these is the barking.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
And the larger the acreage, the hope is.
Well, for conditional, then they could put other restrictions on it.
Yes, they could.
For some, I mean, just because you're 10 acres away or whatever, you're gonna still hear those dogs barking unless there's some barrier or something that might be constructed. So the BZA, whoever could say something has to be there.
Screening,
Right.
lighting
Yeah, yeah,
things,
yeah.
hours of
Okay.
operation, all that stuff.
Location
is-
even on the property.
Location on the property,
Right.
all that stuff.
They have the authority to do all that.
Right.
We thought at least breaking it down by the number of dogs. We also talked about things like, is a kennel that boards different than people who breed, and we went on and on. And we found out that you still have barking dogs at the end of the day. We really couldn't
Distinguished too much.
we couldn't distinguish. So we kept them together, and that was something that the work group talked about
Correct.
over several meetings. So this is where we fell on that, and we'll get to those regulations that I just talked about a little bit later. There's nothing else new here. Retreat facility remains conditional. That's what was currently part of conference center / retreat facility, but previously when you did the commercial zones, you separated those out. And conference center is not allowed in the ag or conservation, but retreat facility is considered appropriate. And there are specific regulations, as you see under additional regulations of 158, 164, that we'll
Do we
get to.
have retreat facilities in the county?
Anna, do you know if we have any of these?
I honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, I can find out
One I can think of, I'm not sure if it's.
if it's considered that,
If
though.
it's considered that, or, but it's, yeah, I'm
No.
not sure if it's considered a retreat facility or a conference center.
Is it on ag?
It's out, it's not horse farm.
Oh, probably ag.
Horse farm. Yeah, it's probably on ag, like, I don't know what it's,
Just curious.
what it's considered.
Okay, I'm gonna stop here. We did have 2 hours for this. Do you want me to continue through accessory uses?
Let's say no.
I don't wanna- anybody.
I do have a question
Yeah.
before we do
Okay.
anything else. Use of off-the-premises signs, what does that mean?
Billboards,
Okay, so if you're going down 140, the billboards that
those are
are.
non-conforming.
You knew.
No, I know, billboards, yeah, nobody wants them. And that's why they're prohibited, I believe, everywhere, correct?
No, they are allowed in commercial.
Oh, okay. So maybe those ones aren't then, that I said were non-conforming, but the ones on ag
When we
land are
allowed those,
non-conforming.
well, yeah, I was, the reason I'm thinking about it, because we had the conversation when he put the ag pres going up 140, but he
Yeah.
excluded those little
That's
areas
right.
that the signs were, and
Yeah.
didn't like the way it was done, to be honest with you, but okay. But, so
Is that
they're.
all ag
they're-
land, or was that part that the billboards are on is commercial, right?
Yeah,
There was
they-
some, there was some commercial.
They cut it
There
out,
was
they
some
cut out
commercial
those,
there,
those
yes.
little areas.
Yeah.
So this is not a change, though, to ag? So
Yeah, I
currently-
just-
Yeah, okay.
Jumped in my mind, that's all.
But I didn't realize, okay, those are allowed in commercial.
Okay.
Shouldn't be allowed
Okay, well, unless
Well,
you
we
stop
got-
me.
We
Okay.
got to an hour 20 through this. You have a choice, to either continue on or wait till week after next.
What was your plan to get through today?
So that's what I was planning to get through, but I'm happy to keep going.
Do we have another one of these scheduled?
We're going for the 25th, 2 weeks from.
We can have 10 more if we want.
Yeah, we can-
Easy
we can-
now.
we can have as many as we want.
We like you, but not that much.
But in the next one, you expect to be finished?
And, well, I have a lot of things to bring back to you,
Okay.
questions that were asked, so I would say probably the.
Why not?
Oh, sorry, thanks.
I would,
was gonna say
I would expect 2 more.
I would expect 2 more also, because we then wanted to bring up the remainder
Right.
issue kind of separately, and then tie it back into the code. So I think 2 more is reasonable.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have Steve here with us as well.
That would be
Additional.
But yeah.
This next part, we're looking at accessory uses.
I will say, the one thing in here, most of these aren't much to talk about, but the accessory dwelling unit conversation is in here, and that was somewhat controversial, and there's some significant changes to that, but again, let me know, do you want me to keep talking?
That was what?
Should I keep going?
Sure.
If it's controversial, I'd really like to have Steve here with us, if you're saying the next section is controversial.
Just the accessory dwelling units, and
Part of
he
it is.
heard it all with the planning commission, but it's up to you guys.
Well, that-
And
He's
if you're
already
not
heard it.
making,
Yeah, because I know it probably impacts his district a lot with a lot of accessory dwellings on property.
I don't think that's a controversial. I think they went
Well,
through
If you're
it.
comfortable, and you know he's covered it before, then we can move forward. Then I was just trying to look out for his interest on it.
And he heard
All
it,
right.
the planning and zoning.
Okay, that's fine.
Keep going.
3 minutes,
Okay.
guys.
all this isn't new, I assume, it's just been moved.
It's been moved, but there is some new
Right.
regulations.
But it's not all.
Yeah, okay.
And I think what I said last week is, we probably spent more time reviewing accessory uses than we did principal uses, because in the ag district, they're pretty important. But, let me just start with, the overarching definition of accessory uses is in number 1, that is also defined in 158.002, and it's basically just, buildings that are customarily incidental to the principal permitted use, and unless they're spelled out here, as many are, that is subject to the interpretation of the zoning administrator, appealable to the BZA. I don't think that causes a lot of problems, I don't think there's a lot of appeals of that. That's usually one that you know it when you see it, and there's a lot of precedent on what's been considered accessory in the past. So that's, as with all the districts, number 1 is the standard language. Home occupation, this is similar to what was in the residential district. What I will tell you is, A through D is new language in the ag district, but it's what was added in the residential district. So if it was good enough for the residential district, our thought was it makes a lot of sense here. And we did not receive any comments regarding that.
Do we have other places in this where it says subject to zoning administrator approval? This is the first time I've seen this.
Just not.
No, throughout it will say that, because the accessory uses, there's 2 ways, and that's really, you have to look at the whole sentence. Subject to zoning administrator approval following submittal of a signed affidavit saying that the use is, and then it's A through D. And then the other ones, it'll say, subject to zoning administrator approval following the procedures that include a public hearing. So some of the ones that attract more attention or might be more onerous on the neighborhood, there's not the opportunity just to have a signed affidavit. You have to post, well, yes, you have to post the property and allow citizens to request a hearing. So it's really the 2, it differentiates between the 2. So for home occupation, Jay felt it was appropriate, and we agreed that for this use, as long as they meet A through D, they should be able to just have a signed affidavit saying the following.
Home occupation would be,
That
would
is-
this be like the
A
lavender
beautician.
farm?
Like what?
The lavender farm where they're, it's a
No,
home?
that's a farm.
That would be agriculture.
That's
And that's
a-
agricultural.
Okay.
No,
this-
it'd be like an attorney's office.
This
You
would
had
be
small-
running an accounting office out of the home or something.
I would think like an accounting office.
An
anything
accounting
that
office, an
says
attorney's office.
With no customers to the dwelling, so they're
Yeah.
able to do stuff remotely. That's what it can be.
Okay. Thank you.
And it's conducted solely by the resident. So you're not gonna see a lot of coming and going.
So is that what that item C about the sign is about? Like, say you're an attorney, you put a shingle out or something? Is that what that is to cover?
Yes.
Okay.
Direction sign or something.
So again, A through D are new, but that allows them to just have a signed affidavit saying they comply with that.
All right, now hold on a second. How could you have a home attorney's office
And no customers?
and no customers to the
No.
dwelling?
It's a very poor.
Been there and done that, no problem.
What?
You meet your clients elsewhere, that's not a
They
problem.
never come to the house?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I just thought, wait a minute.
Oh, no,
That's pretty
absolutely.
All right.
And it's more than an attorney, I mean, an attorney
Yeah,
with some
lots
other.
of.
Okay,
Yeah,
then,
It means
You
it's not
could-
gonna be
you
a
could-
doctor's office
You could
or
do,
something
you
like
could do
Well,
Tupperware sales,
or,
and you do all your
you know,
sales, no, you
Right.
can't do, you can't do sales.
Everything's
I'm trying to think
virtual
something.
today.
But
Yeah.
consult.
Consult.
Okay, I got
Tax
you.
accountant
I got you.
that doesn't have somebody.
I
from
thought-
the attorney's office.
Okay.
My business is outside my house. My
Yeah.
office is in my house.
I've heard plenty of complaints about that,
It's
trust me.
okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3 is just business signs, that's existing language. Private stable on a lot of 3 acres or more for 1 animal unit, et cetera. You will remember you discussed this whole animal unit issue in detail with the residential. If you want to rediscuss it, we can, but we kept it the same, we just carried it forward to the ag district, but it doesn't affect any actual, as you'll see under C, beyond 5 animal units is considered an agricultural use and must meet the requirements for agricultural use. But the rest of this is just reflecting what you did in the residential districts regarding animal units and how much acreage they need. Number 5, saddlery and tack shop on the premises of a commercial stable is existing as a appropriate accessory use. Number 6, storage modules may be used in conjunction with an approved business use of the property, provided that, and A is a new requirement. And this was a problem brought to us by the zoning administrator. On property of 10 acres and less, there shall be no more than one storage module located on the property. And if it's more than 10 acres, there should be no more than one storage module for each additional 10 acres. And this obviously would keep, there's numerous ones being on small properties. That is new language that we felt was appropriate to bring forward. B, all the way, that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are existing requirements.
Are we defining the size of the storage module?
Mm-hmm.
It is not defined.
Wait,
The maximum size, 8
Yeah,
by
right.
24.
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, it's right there.
I apologize.
I think I was gonna get this far today. Okay, again, B is all existing language, there's no change there. Family daycare is existing, but the new part is, and this is what you allowed for the residential districts, that they can submit a signed affidavit stating that they meet all the applicable Maryland state requirements. That's a carryover from what you did in residential, if you think it's appropriate. Okay, we are now at accessory dwelling units. So, a recap on accessory dwelling units. Currently, if they're attached, they're allowed 1 per lot. If they're detached, they are only currently permitted if you have subdivision rights on the property. And the requirements are different because if you have subdivision rights, you're not gonna have minimum size, or you're not gonna have minimum bedrooms, because you could actually subdivide it and have a whole house. So what's being proposed, and what the Planning Commission agreed to, is that they be considered, with the exception of that last requirement, basically in the same way. I'll just go through them. They must have direct access from the outside. The property owner, this is current requirement, difficult to enforce, but is a current requirement, must occupy either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling on the property. C is new. C and D are new to detached accessory dwellings. The maximum size of an accessory dwelling shall not be more than 1,000 square feet of livable floor area. Again, that was defined. And the accessory dwelling unit shall have no more than 2 bedrooms. Currently, again, those did not apply to detached, and what applied to attached was 800 feet, or 1/3 of the total square footage, which everybody found confusing. So the compromise was to make it 1,000 square feet, which is really not excessive if you're only allowing 2 bedrooms. It has to meet all applicable health and mental hygiene regulations. 1 additional off-street parking space must be provided for each bedroom. Only 1, and that's attached or detached, you can't have both, shall be permitted on a lot, and that would keep it from getting out of control. H came out of a lot of discussion on whether or not we wanted to drop the requirement that for detached, you have to have subdivision rights, because this requirement only applies to that. They have to be on lots of at least 3 acres in size, and they cannot be located more than 50 feet from the principal dwelling. And I think, but there's reasons for both of those. For the 50 feet, it was given the concern that somebody might, if they have a huge piece of property, put the accessory dwelling on the total other side of their property where it wasn't gonna be accessory and they didn't even know what was going on. This keeps it to being truly accessory to the main dwelling, and the 3 acres is what is required for septic.
And the problem happens in the second and third owner, is where the things falls apart. Usually the primary owner builds it, it's fine, but when they sell it, then they want to divide it, or somebody wants to get it rented or do some other issues, and that's where it becomes a
It's-
problem.
yeah.
And so for detached, they still have to have a building lot?
No, they would
No.
not have to have the building lot. They would
Okay.
have to have at least 3 acres.
It's just the 3 acres.
Three-
And the
minimum lot
50.
size that the health department would require for what they, when it comes to the waters for their
Yeah, the
wells.
septic and the replacing of septic and stuff.
And then being only 50 feet from the principal dwelling, again, we're looking to keep this where it's
Room's probably 50
truly
feet.
accessory, where it cannot be in, seen as, oh, this is a totally second, it's truly accessory, and of course, obviously, yes, down the road, somebody, the second owner chooses not to use it, and they could then use it as a home occupation office, that type of thing potentially, so there's certain things that could be done, but the 50 feet was one where it's reasonable. And I did some looking in, like, with detached garages, most of them are 50 feet from the house. And they fit the size of 1,000 square feet, so it made sense that 50 feet would be a reasonable aspect. No more, and then obviously you could be less if you wanted, but. 50.
And maybe an idea that we possibly got this right was we've received comments on both ends of this that we're being too restrictive and not restrictive enough. Originally, there was a lot of concern over even getting rid of the requirement for subdivision, and that's why we tried to work in some of these requirements. We've since, Marty Hackett wrote in a letter objecting to some of these limitations that we have, so that's on the other side of it, that we need to open it up more. I will also point out, this doesn't affect accessory dwellings in the residential districts. I think there was that concern. This is only for the ag and conservation, so it is not the residential districts.
I think that was the primary concern during the work group discussion, as we were discussing it, is that we're talking about ag and conservation here, and we all recognize that there's a benefit to having these accessory dwelling units to provide affordable housing and so on. But we felt that that's appropriate in the municipalities and residential areas and so on. Increasing the density of development, which is this is doing. We're not doubling it or anything, but we're allowing for additional dwelling units on conservation and agricultural land by allowing these accessory dwelling units. Increasing that density, we were questioning whether that was appropriate in the agricultural and conservation zones. We think it's very appropriate in the municipalities where there are the services available for the increased density, but we questioned whether it was appropriate for ag and conservation. So that was, I think, the crux of the discussion during the work group.
Makes sense.
So is there any further information you want me to bring back, or any possible changes you want to make to this section at this point?
You handled this very well in the workshop, I thought, in the planning and zoning.
You live and breathe this stuff.
Then obviously this is not the final discussion of any of this. There's no change to number 9, antique and arts and craft shops in conjunction with a residence or farming operation. And again, this is one of those, Commissioner Rothstein, that you had been asking about, subject to zoning administrator
Yeah.
approval. This is different because it's in accordance with 130G, which means posting of the property, requesting of a public hearing. This one, there's no affidavit. This is a little more what you'd want people to weigh in on. Number 10, we changed it a little bit. If you have a beauty parlor or barber shop and it's only one chair, meaning you're doing it yourself, you can submit a signed affidavit saying that it'll just be you. However, if it's going to be by more than one person, then you should be going through the zoning administrator posting and public hearing process. So that's split out a little. That was new. Stop me if questions. Roadside stands hasn't changed. Dance studios this was actually strangely used to be under principal use, but it's not. It's accessory. Cottage industry, which is defined in the code, but this is very clear. It has to be conducted by a resident. Can't exceed 2,000 square feet of area that they're working in, and this can be a signed affidavit. Within a dwelling, the professional office of a physician, insurance agent, realtor, or other profession determined to be similar in use, that's current language. That would be different from the home occupation, because that would be people coming to the home. Lawn care and maintenance service, this is a little bit of a change here too. This is currently permitted, but this is approval following submittal of a signed affidavit stating that the use meets all applicable requirements, provided there are no more than 2 vehicles, 2 trailers, and 4 employees, including the owner of the business. And I think the zoning administrator felt strongly that we needed to put these kind of limitations on it to make sure it remains an accessory use and not a commercial business.
And also it doesn't become a contractor's equipment storage yard, I would
Exactly.
assume,
That
right?
actually
Yeah.
was the specific, yep.
Currently, does the zoning administrator have delegating authority?
I don't think so, not by code.
No, to delegate it to another staff member?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, we have a single point of failure when we're talking about all of this.
Well, it is always
Number one.
appealable to the BZA, his decision.
Well,
his
no,
rulings.
I get that, but I mean, if the zoning administrator as an individual is not available for an extended period of time.
Oh, then you can appoint another, an acting zoning administrator.
So
That's actually
If the
happening.
zoning administrator is overwhelmed by activity, does the zoning administrator have the ability to delegate
Not
his or her
the-
authority?
Not,
You know?
not the decision authority, but
Yeah,
but
that's
he
what I'm-
has staff to assist him with workload.
Right,
And then
investigation.
he's the ultimate authority of making the decisions.
Yeah, I'm talking about decision-making authority. Okay, we should take a hard look at that.
That would be
because-
state law, I believe,
Mm,
isn't it? I think it
I think it is in state
that's-
law.
We'll look, but I think that's state law, yeah.
I would take a look at that then, because, you know, where we're looking at single points of failure in adjusting a lot of this, you know, it's difficult. You know, we're putting a lot of, focus on an individual for making decisions in a lot of this activity. Fortunately, you know, we're successful in doing it, but we're putting a lot of emphasis on it and, well, I don't know.
I don't think that we've heard that's an issue. I mean, Anna can speak to that since she works in the zoning office.
I think there could be tremendous confusion to have 2 zoning administrators. So, and there is a system to replace the zoning administrator if they're out for, any significant period of time, so we'll look at what level of the law it is. We'll let you know.
Okay. I mean, I just, you know, we hear a lot about permitting and issues like that, and, you know, sticking points. But with all of this emphasis on decisions made by the zoning administrator, it just kind of sticks out to me as it may be a concern. I mean, it may not be, but I'd like to at least address it. Okay.
So really, as you go down, nothing here is new. It's all existing language that's in the code, just relocated, until you get to number 18, and this is what we talked about. As an accessory use, the production of firewood, humus, wood chips, or mulch is an accessory use to the farming or residential parcels for land clearing or private use purposes. It has to comply with the distance requirements of 040, and no wood may be piled over 6 feet, and no variances may be, to these requirements may be granted. This is really to address an existing problem that comes before the BZA, and that's why it's unusual to see no variances may be granted, but sometimes, I think
Why
we've
did
only
you-
recommended it a few times, but you.
Why'd you put no wood may be piled over 6 feet?
Is that a liability reason?
I believe was a fire. Anna, can you help me out with what Jay wanted with that one? I think it was partly just visually.
Visually, yeah, and people will have so many complaints about the firewood cells, and in general, what people doing, they're creating blocks, and visually for the actual neighbors and stuff, yeah, it's ridiculous, and look like a commercial firewood production or commercial sawmill. So if you have limitation in 6 feet, it's no higher than the regular fence, then, you know, you can cover it with fence and that's it. So and it's accessory to the residence.
Struck me
right?
as odd on this, that's all. Okay, never mind.
It's easier for us to enforce what can people have on their property.
Get your tape and go out.
But that kind of goes back to not using words like small and little and saying 6 feet.
If you have one file, that's okay, but if you have 20 of them, that's
Yeah.
where you have.
I mean, it's driven by complaints.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's concerned to zoning, so, yeah.
And the last two articulated accessory uses, this is existing, number 19. I think it was this board that passed the farm alcohol producer legislation, and this is currently in there. That's when associated with a farm alcohol producer, those A through F. And then the last one, number 20, is new. That's what we talked about a little bit, livestock incineration in the agricultural district, provided the incineration is only of animals raised on the property, except in extenuating circumstances, and that would be determined by the zoning administrator. And it was explained to us, sometimes you need that if there's some sort of bird flu or something going on like that. You would need somebody who has the ability to do it, to be doing it for other people in his community. And it wasn't thought that that would get out of control.
There've been a couple health, Humane Society issues that
Right.
brought that to light.
Yeah,
in
that
the
was
last
one
5
in
or so
my
years.
area. That was really,
Yeah.
So that's the end of accessory uses. Probably you would like me to not get into bulk requirements, and we could pick up there. At the next meeting, I'll start with getting you the answers to follow up from today. And we can move right into what we have left in this code, and then move on to the discussion of remainders of those times.
I have one question, actually, that sort of concerns this. When a zoning administrator makes a decision, let's say turn something down, then that group takes it to the BZA. The BZA often does, overturns his decision. Do they have to cite where he was wrong?
Mhm.
Do they do?
They write a decision, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, Tim Dixon is the attorney that represents the BZA, and he writes the decision identifying. They have to, in open session, and they're, at the end of their hearing, they all discuss it, and then they come to a resolution, take a vote, and outline their reasoning for allowing or disallowing
Right, but the
something.
reasoning, but that doesn't, what I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
Jay makes a decision. Their reasoning is different than Jay's.
Right.
But that doesn't mean whatever Jay decided was incorrect. Just means they had a different interpretation.
Well, that's the way the legal system
Yeah,
works.
I'm just thinking, something should say, Jay said, not Jay, but Jay
They-
said this, basically, we think that, and the reason we don't go along with Jay is because you would have to make a mistake, I would think, in order for them to overturn it, but that's not the way it is.
Frequently, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, not necessarily. Jay's responsibility is to align his decisions with this and with the code. The Board of Zoning Appeals should take and needs to take into effect any of the extenuating circumstances or mitigating evidence or intent of the individual, and then render their decision, which may provide a subjective opinion that's different than what Jay's, recommendations are to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And that's what happens, at least in my experience.
They follow the code strictly,
But Jay will sit there and.
otherwise it winds up across the street.
But Jay will
Well-
sit there and be against the decision,
Right.
and it's not like he's gonna be upset about it, it's like,
No, I'm
that's
not
their
saying that,
responsibility. so.
but it just seems to me, everything that goes before BZA is passed. And because they don't want it to go across the street.
Not necessarily.
I see very, I don't
No.
know.
frequently the cards are stacked in the applicant's favor when it's a conditional use. But I would say that, in all the times when I sat on the Board of Zoning Appeals, that the zoning administrator brought something to us, we almost always upheld the zoning administrator's decision. That's one where we rarely went against their decision.
Those
Found,
days are gone.
well, that may be, because different boards, just like different judges, are gonna be different, you know, and, but a well-written decision, and well-reasoned decision by the Board of Zoning Appeals should definitely state their reasons for their decision. And it should say, you know, if we, you know, the zoning administrator thought 158.048 meant 10 feet, and we believe it means 20 feet, and so therefore it's allowed. You know, that's a silly example, but.
I understand, yeah. Okay.
Or in this situation, in this environment, in this place, 10 feet, you know, if he's going 15 feet,
Or
it's
they,
not going to disturb
right.
the situation.
Or they say, well, we see where the zoning administrator was going, but we think that with these additional conditions,
Right.
it would be allowable. That would also be. So there are a lot of different ways it could work out, so. But that's why it's important who the Board of County Commissioners puts on the Board of Zoning Appeals.
You don't have anybody who wants to get on the board. That's a problem.
That's a
There's not enough
problem.
applicants. The
That's-
same people have been on there forever,
That's true.
and this group has
apply in
allowed
January.
everything to go through.
You can apply mid-December.
I might be doing that.
Okay.
I'm looking for another job.
Anything else? This was a good discussion.
Well done, thank you. Thank you.
I think, you know, next week we have Mako, the following week on Thursday, 1 p.m. Same back channel, same back station, all that kind of stuff.
I watch Batman every week on WeTV.
Anything else for the good of the group? Okay, I need a motion to adjourn for the day.
Motion to adjourn for the day.
Second.
Motion second.
Nobody seconded, we have to say. Aye.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.